I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Okay, welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. Today I am joined by a new friend and colleague, Adele Tevlin.
That's right.
Okay. I was just telling Adele that I've spelled her name wrong and pronounced it wrong for like the last 6 months, and so I was quite nervous about that.
Don't worry.
Okay, but we're good. Adele, I'm so excited for us to have this conversation today. I have just completed your sort of introductory mindset workshop, which you're going to talk about later on in the episode. But it was really sort of eye-opening for me, even as someone who spent lots of time in therapy, who've spent lots of time working on personal development, to realize how much our subconscious and this sort of like imprinted ideas of who we are and who we can be or who we would like to become has such a profound impact on the way we show up in the world. And so when I invited you on the podcast today, I really wanted to sort of dissect this concept around mindset and values and all of this for our women, because I think our listeners are kind of like on the verge of doing something bigger and wanting something more in their lives. And I feel like you're the right woman to have this conversation about how to take the next step.
Because I'll just push you to the next level,
That's right. You'll just make us do it.
Exactly.
So, can you walk us through like how you got here? Like, how did you get to this place in your career and life?
How long do we have? No, I'm just kidding. First of all, I'm so happy to be here and have this conversation. I think not just for women, I think for humanity as a whole right now, this probably is one of the most important conversations that we can have around, why we do the things we do, what are the beliefs that we have in our mind that hold us back? Like, what is going on in the world? Why are we so polarized? I mean, it's such an interesting time to be having this conversation. So I feel really grateful. When I look back at how I got here, it's like my favorite Steve Jobs quote is, "You can't connect the dots looking forward, but only looking back." And I've been in this work my whole life, but when I think back to everything I've done, when I was doing it, it didn't make sense. So if I take you back, 20 years, I started at McGill. I have a degree in neuroscience, and I'm a perpetual learner. So, I did that. And then I went to this Institute of Holistic Nutrition because I was always very fascinated with the brain and the body. And then I, got certified as a cognitive behavioral therapist, an inner child therapy worker, and then have done a myriad of things, including working on a degree at Harvard University in psychology. But all this to say is that those are just my accolades or credentials on my wall. But I think what actually is more significant is that I've been obsessed with human behavior my entire life. Like and I'm a student of it. You'll get to know this with me more, Jordan, but I study like 4 hours a day, and what do I study? I study personal growth and development. I study why people do what they do and why they don't do. What makes someone successful versus unsuccessful? What are the characteristics of successful people? What is mindset, and how do we break through our limiting beliefs? So this has been sort of like a lifelong journey that has led me here to be doing this work in the forum that you participated in, where, and we'll talk more about it, but, group work with men and women who are at a place in their life where they're like, I know there's more for me. I don't know what necessarily, I just know there's more. And I know I'm stuck. And that's sometimes that takes a level of humility for people to say, you know what? I know I'm my own limiting reagent here. I know I'm blocking my growth and success. And I always say to people, and for someone like you who's been in therapy before, and I'm in therapy now, I have a therapist and a coach, and I believe in really, I think when you're elite, you actually have to implement a lot of resources to get yourself to the next level. But I always say you can't solve the problem from the same level it was created, Einstein's quote. So when you're in your own, we'll talk about imprints, and when you're in your own limiting beliefs, you cannot see it. It's a blind spot. So sometimes having someone external from you to be able to say, Jordan, if you just did it a little bit, if you pivoted this way just a little bit, that would be a completely different result. And I think that is what the work's about, is actually having someone show you a different path that you might not already see because you've never traveled that path before. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. And I love like this like conversation about sort of imprinting. Can you describe
Mm-hmm.
that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. So it's like the foundation of my work, which is that we have a conscious and a subconscious mind. And for people that are listening that might have never heard anything about this, you have three aspects of your mind. You have your conscious mind, your subconscious mind, and your body. And your conscious mind is your thinking mind. It's the part of you that thinks and reasons and is trying to figure things out. So even as you're listening to this podcast, you're listening to, oh, I like that. I don't like that. I agree. I've heard that before. That's all your conscious mind. Your subconscious mind is the part of you that regulates everything automatic about you. So you don't have to remember how to tie your shoes or to brush your teeth. You don't have to remind your heart to beat every day. That is part of your subconscious mind. It's the part of you that regulates things as a habit. It's where all your habits are stored. But what's really interesting about this and what's important is that prior to the age of 7, and we've talked about this in the course, Jordan, prior to the age of 7, and a lot of people don't realize this, you do not have a conscious mind. Your conscious mind forms at the age of 7. So why this is so relevant is that prior to 7, you're taking in information from all around you, and it's getting fixed into your subconscious mind, mainly because the subconscious mind does not have the ability to reject information. So what does that mean? So it means that think about who you're around between the ages of 0 and 7. Well, your mom or dad or your guardians or your grandparents or whoever raised you. And you're experiencing the world in a state of hypnosis because the subconscious mind works in what's called theta wave state. And theta wave state is a very slow wavelength, the same as hypnosis. So when you look at children, and I have a son, he's 4, and I actually think it's fascinating because I could say to him, honey, I'm going to the moon. I'll see you later. He would say, okay, mommy. Like he is not rationally, and this is really critical for those women that are listening that have children. This is not to make yourself wrong about your children. This is for you to understand that prior to the age of 7, we take in everything around us as fact. And so what happens when we're kids is that we're taking all these things happening around us from our mom and dad, but the things that happened repetitively over time, the behaviors, the actions, the emotions that you saw your parents take on over and over again became imprinted in your subconscious mind and formed what we call an imprint or a belief. It's a false belief. So let's give this some context for people. What are some common imprints? I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. Very common for women, especially around their health. Women that have a hard time sticking to a health protocol or struggle with weight, there's often an unworthiness piece there, which would make total sense because your imprint is like a confirmation bias. If you have a belief, I'm going to use imprint and belief interchangeably, or false belief. They're the same thing. If I believe I'm not worthy, how do you think I'm going to treat my body? Why? Because if I actually believed I was worthy, I would treat my body well. So we confirm our bias. If I believe I'm unworthy, then I treat my body in an unworthy way. If I don't think I'm good enough, I tend to attract partners into my life or people into my life that don't treat me well. If I believe that life is a struggle, that's another very common imprint that I find with people, especially if your parents are, like my parents are immigrants, or if you have post-war parents or parents that went through any hardship and they had a belief that life was a struggle, that became imprinted as a belief that you have. And so how does that manifest in your life? Life is literally a struggle. So it's so fascinating because when you start to like dissect, like first of all, part of it, the work is intuitively, I can see what people's imprints are because they're living them. And I've lived, we all have we have about 8 to 10 imprints, and I have my own 8 to 10 imprints. But part of the work that I've been on this healing journey for the last, I would say, very deep dive over the last 4 years, ever since I had my son, my commitment to myself was I wanted to rewrite my story so that I didn't imprint those beliefs onto him. And so I really went on this deep kind of spiritual journey. And part of what I love about this work is it's a combination of neuroscience and spirituality, right? Like they intersect because, where do you find truths in the world? Through the universal laws and also through theology. So I've kind of intersected these two disciplines to really get to the source of what what are my imprints and how do I need to heal those so that I can then step into the person I really want to become? And Joe Dispenza says it beautifully. You're either a prisoner of your past. Most people are prisoners of their past conditioning. They're living in the past. Their thoughts are the thoughts they had yesterday. And the work that I am really passionate about is rewiring people's subconscious mind to start to believe the truth about themselves, that they're worthy of love in their life, that they can have what they desire, that they don't need to struggle. Okay? And once those truths sink into your subconscious mind and become a habit, you start to live out those truths. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And it's what I found cool about this, or like, I mean, that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface, but like, was that it wasn't like intuitive to me what those things were. And
Yes.
you asked some great trigger questions to help sort of unravel what those, like you said, it's a blind spot, right? Like, well, you can't, it's very difficult to look inside and say, well, how did I see the word? Like, what
Yes,
was this
totally.
construct that was built for me when I was young? And then how am I carrying that forward? How can our listeners start to ask themselves, like, or if they're curious about discovering what those imprints are, is there a process they can walk through?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the process is certainly asking certain questions. So, for example, I mean, part of it is actually saying to yourself, I want to come, and it's funny, this has been the theme of the week for me, and there's always a theme of the week, but I think given what's going on in presidential elections and how much judgment, the word judgment's been coming up a lot for me. So one of the practices that I teach in the 4-step process to heal the imprints that Jordan, you started to learn about is part of healing starts with coming from a place of non-judgment. Okay. Non-judgment for who? For yourself. Okay. So part of where people's mind goes, if you're already listening to this and you're going like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. This is your conscious mind going into, or your ego mind saying there's something wrong, judgment. But if you can come from a place and go, isn't this interesting? Right? That's already a different, isn't this interesting? I keep replaying the same habit and pattern over and over and over again. What's the habit or pattern? Maybe I overeat and then I feel guilty and shameful and then I do this. Or maybe the habit is I have a really hard day and then I drink. Or maybe the habit is I say I'm going to do something, I start and then I quit. Like, you look for yourself with radical honesty and non-judgment, and you literally write down, what are the repeating habits that I have that keep me stuck, that I'm trying to break continuously and it never works? Or the people that, diet and they do well for a week and they bounce back up. Like, what's that about? And this is what you have to understand. When we talked about this, it's not conscious. There are some of the most intelligent people in the world that stay stuck because your subconscious mind is not about it's not about intellect. It's a pattern. It's a habit. Your subconscious mind is always going to go towards the habit it knows, not the thing you say you want, because it's based on pattern recognition. So what do I mean by that? Even look at something as simple as, you have a way that you wake up in the morning and go brush your teeth and do your morning routine. And it's probably the same every day because your brain is hardwired for pattern recognition. So the minute you want to do something different, the part of your mind called your ego mind, your limbic system, it wants to keep you safe. So you're constantly having this duality between those two things. But some questions to ask yourself is, what are some of the habits that I keep staying stuck in? Okay. The other thing to ask yourself is, what was it like growing up with my mom and dad? Especially around topics like health, money, sex, religion. Those are big. Was there shame in your house about intimacy? Was there a not enough complex about money? And then do you play out that same story? Do you never have enough money? Like, I go into a whole teaching on money that, like, I don't think we'll have a chance to do here, but part of it is that the way you relate to money is very much how your parents related to money. So you take a look and you say, what was it like growing up around my mom and dad? Like, just start to think of some of the real flashbulb, like, give yourself permission to kind of look at some of the ways that it was like growing up with them. But the key thing is that you really take a look at your life like a scientist and you say, what is my current reality? Because my current reality, and if people are listening to this, this is kind of like a really highlighted Adeleism, is like, your current, like, always just like some of these things, like, what if you're listening and writing or you're taking notes, or you listen to this on a walk but you want to take notes after, this would be something I would write down, is that your current reality is a direct reflection of your inner state, your subconscious mind. So if you really look at it like a scientist and you say, Maybe you're someone who is a woman, because mostly I think women listen to your podcast, or a man, and you're single, but you really want to be in a relationship, but you keep finding yourself to be single. Perhaps you have an imprint saying, I'm all alone. Okay. Or you have this desire to make more money or to have more impact, but you constantly find that you don't have enough. You probably have an imprint called there's not enough. Because your imprint is, like we talked about just before we started recording, Jordan, it's the lens with which you see the world. And it actually directs your reality, because you start to confirm your bias, right? Confirmation bias. Like I said, if you believe there's not enough, what do you keep confirming? And so what's so interesting is, this is how people kind of stay stuck in the feedback loop. And I think we were talking about this, you and I, Jordan, just before we started recording too, that people really want to change, but they're not willing to really do what it takes to change. And I think that's where people get super stuck, because here's the thing, and I had a mentor say this to me once before, in order for you to have a breakthrough in whatever area of your life that you're stuck, it's going to require you to make a massive, like to have a massive shift. And that massive shift, and you're nodding your head because you know as a practitioner, it usually requires spending money on yourself. And people don't want to. And then they say, I can't afford it. And then the universe goes, okay, you can't afford it, so you stay stuck. When I learned that, because part of what I teach in my programs, especially in the one that you're going to be doing soon, is universal laws, like truths, like axioms, like the law of gravitation. So some of these laws really tell you that, we talked about the law of cause and effect, that you are the cause of your life. Your thinking causes your actions. And if you have a belief that there's never enough, and then an opportunity shows up for you to up level, but you say, I can't afford it, you literally push that opportunity away. When I got present to that 5 years ago, because my mentor at the time basically said to me, you're going to need to step into the discomfort, especially around money, because I had that same money story. Like I sort of felt like I would make money, but then I felt like I had to hoard it or something like that. And everything, whenever an opportunity presented itself, I'd say that's very expensive. And he kept saying to me, stop saying it's expensive. You're just creating more of that. So then I was like, you're right. I'm going to lean into it. And it changed everything for me. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. It makes me think of so many things, right? Like,
you're like, thought trip. Hold on. Squirrel.
I know my brain is like,
oh, it's good though.
Which is good, right? Because it makes me think of even just the way we describe things in health and healthcare. I would say, like, can we talk about something related to food other than the cost? Right? Like, even when you open a flyer, it's like salmon, $2.99, lentils, 79 cents. Like, we never talk about any other quality when it comes to healthcare other than the cost of it. We never say this salmon is like 17 grams of protein and a gram of omega-3s. Never, right? And so it's interesting because it always keeps reinforcing those same patterns, right?
Totally.
But one of the other things that I found so cool about our discussions, like over the last month, is some of those like non-truths, right? Where we think there's cause and effect and there isn't, right?
Oh,
and my favorite that you mentioned was like, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to get a good job and then this is going to happen. And like the number of things that we believe, like we believe in sequencing that doesn't exist, which I think holds women back, right? They'll say, I'll join a gym when I
oh my God,
5 pounds. I'll do this once I've become an expert on it, right?
Yeah.
And so we create these like artificial timelines that really just keep women from not doing anything at all.
Yeah.
And there's also just these like non-truths that we don't spend a lot of time trying to, break that down, right? To say, well, like, where did that come from?
Totally.
Just because you work, 50 hours a week doesn't mean you have enough money. Just because you do this doesn't mean you have that.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God. This is like one of my favorite things to talk about. What you're talking about here, Jordan, is brilliant. It's true. We talked about this called the law of cause and effect. And the law of cause and effect, I mean, we've all learned about this, I think, in physics or something like that back in high school, where it's basically every cause has an effect and every effect has a cause. But the thing is that most people think that the cause of something is not the actual cause. Okay. So let me get specific here. I actually called this, I think, in our course, the Santa Claus effect. Okay. So when we're children, think about this for a second. And I actually caught myself doing this the other day with my son because it's so hardwired. It's a prescription we have as humanity. When we're children, our mom and dad usually say to us, if you're a good girl or a good boy, you can have this treat. So we start to link up in our mind. Everybody needs to be paying attention to this because this is so important, and your ego is going to want to not hear this because it's literally like it's going to confront you. We learn if I'm good, I get something. So we start to link up in our mind, I need to be a good girl to get what I want, or a good boy. When in fact, being good has nothing to do with receiving. By law, the law of receiving states it's not about being good. It's about understanding what are the thoughts that you're thinking as a cause for the actions that you're taking, because everything starts as a thought. But most people walk around thinking, if I'm good. So then as women, how this manifests is we play it safe. We don't say that what there is to say. We play small. We need to be good girls.
Mm-hmm. And if you think about what being good usually means, it's about appealing to authority.
Yeah, being quiet, appealing to authority.
Doing what your teacher said. Hand it
Yeah.
in time. Don't question the instructions.
Exactly. And so this whole totally. And so when you actually understand the absurdity of it, like it's actually not the proper use by law, and law, universal law is mathematics. That's like saying 2 + 2 = 4. Cause and effect is the same. You are the first cause of your life. Like your thinking, your feeling, and your acting causes a result. But most people think that they're at the mercy of their circumstances. But partly it's because we've been conditioned to believe if I'm good, if I'm nice, if I'm quiet, I'll get something. Let's back up for even a minute even further. Why do we do this? Well, as children, if you're, part of we talked about this a little bit, like you conform, you become an identity that fits into your family to stay safe. So a lot of imprints that I see in women, especially I would say in the healthcare community, interestingly enough, is this, they're very quiet and shy. There's this like introversion or this like not fully being self-expressed. And when I look at it and you look at the imprint, it's like, when I ask those women, like, when I identify the core wound, it's, I need to be a good girl. I need to be good. And that whole thing needs to shift, because in order for women to really lead the way that they need to lead, they need to be not good. They need to be authentic. So that example of cause and effect that you gave earlier there, I gave that as an example in class where we talked about, like, even for me growing up, it's go to school, get a really good job. It was actually go to med school, or my mom wanted me to become a dentist. So actually I was in pre-med at McGill. I did a degree in neuroscience and stuff like that. So I was like pre-med in microbiology, and and then dentistry. So she wanted me to become a dentist. I remember carving when you do the DAT, which is like the MCAT, you have to like carve like this stick of soap. And yeah. I remember doing this in my dorm room, bawling my eyes out. It was like this spiritual awakening. Like it was like a come to Jesus moment where I was like, I can't do this, because in my mind, I had the authority of my mom and my dad in my head. And this is really important for people to hear. I was like 20 something years old, and I'm carving this stick of whatever in my room, bawling my eyes out, because I know in my heart, that is not my life's purpose. But in my mind, I had this causation. I had the law of cause and effect was be a good girl, be a really good student. So nailed that. Okay, go to medical school or dental school, nailed that, take over my practice and live a happy life. That is not how it works. How many of us have gone to school, gotten a great job, and are totally broke?
Or totally miserable.
Totally miserable, because it's not the proper use of the law of cause and effect. The proper use of the law of cause and effect is I am first cause in my life. I choose and decide how I want this to go. But in order for people to have that level of confidence, they need to really see for themselves that they've allowed the voice of their mom and dad in their head. Even for people that I work with that are in their 60s, they still have their mom and their dad as the authority in their mind. And you brought that word up, authority, which I love, because I talk about that until you actually become the authority in your mind, somebody else is.
Mm-hmm.
And who's that authority? Is it a teacher in school that told you you're never going to amount to something, or a coach? Is it a mom or a dad that could have been verbally abusive to you? Who's the authority? If it's not you, it's somebody else. So part of this journey is reclaiming your authority and saying, even in a time like this, when you think about how many conflicting beliefs there are, or value conflicts that people have, and how polarized we become, sometimes it's like a step back to say, wait a minute, what do I believe? And that just is a shift in and of itself. So I think for people that are like listening to this, even for the first time and have never heard anything like this, your brain's probably like popping and all sorts of things are happening. So I invite you to probably re-listen to this. But, some of the core imprints for people that are common is, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I'm not safe. That's a big one too. I'm not safe. And then you find environments. This is the key. The quintessence is this. You then reflect that into your external reality, and that gets mirrored back at you by people, places, and things in your life, because your external reality is a mirror. So you just have to take a quick look at your life from an objective, non-judgmental place and say, okay, what's the deal with my finances? What's the deal with my happiness? What's the deal with my health? What's the deal with my relationships? That's a really great place to start. And that will have your brain go into, and give yourself permission. See, a lot of people, they get scared because I think for some people, and I think we've all been here, where it's hard to hear the truth sometimes about ourselves. Like sometimes it's easier to be in the safety that okay? But when you transcend that and you truly see, and I mean, I've been doing this for a really long time, and I see people pop all the time where they have this moment of breakthrough where they're like, oh my God, and I think you had that even in the course, where stuff, like you said, it wasn't intuitive. You're like, holy shit, like I've been having this belief about myself and I didn't even know it. It is wild what happens when your subconscious mind will give you that resource and you're like, I can't believe I didn't see it. And then it's like, you can't unsee it, right? Once you see your blind spot, you cannot unsee it. Would that be accurate for you too?
Totally. And I think because I can be so like highly intellectual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that partly was a little bit of a barrier because I was always rationalizing or trying to like, dissect it from that perspective. And there were parts of it that couldn't be looked at it from that, from that lens, right?
Totally. Mm-hmm. And I think we talked about that too, where it's like I think a lot of the people that gravitate towards my work are intellectual, and which is amazing. And I think I said this in class one day, because I'm intellectual too. Like, I mean, I have all the degrees in the world to prove that I really believe in that. But here's the thing. Transformation does not happen in your intellect. It happens in your subconscious mind, which is your feeling mind. The Greeks called it the heart of the mind, because it's where all your emotions are stored. It's where all your trauma is stored. It's where all your childhood stuff is stored. And so we try to think and reason our way out of certain things that just cannot be thought and reasoned out of. And you have to get into like a deeper level of understanding with yourself. I think this also speaks to, as you said, that what came up for me as like a flash of insight is, I don't know, you know really well with your patients, like I think a lot of women can get disconnected from their body. And one of the things that I think that this work is so powerful is it has you actually connect to your body again and really understand, what is that feeling in my stomach? What is that feeling in my throat? Where are some of those imprints stored in my body? Because when we disconnect from our body, why do you think we do that? It's a way to stay safe.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're, as you know, as a doctor, like part of healing is really understanding that it's healing all aspects of self. It's not just the body. It's not just the mind. It's not just the spirit. It's all three planes of understanding. It's actually understanding that I'm a being that has all these different levels. I have an emotional self. I have an intellectual self. I have a body. Remember we did that meditation? And I have a spiritual self. That's your inner wisdom, your inner guide. That's your intuition. And your intuition is a higher faculty of your intellect. It's actually not an esoteric quality. Your intuition is a real thing, like reasoning or perceiving. But for most women, we're very attuned to our intuition, but we have not listened to it, or we've shut it off because it's scary, So I think for women listening right now too, it's like reclaiming those parts of yourself that are actually authentically you.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question. So
yeah.
let me see if I can say it clearly. So when we have that sort of imprint, right? Like I'm just going to make one up and say like the world is not safe, or that other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it that we don't see the stranger smiling at us in our reality, or are they literally not there? Do you know what I'm asking? So here, I'll try and say it in a different way. So sometimes like people can see opportunity, right? Then opportunity is there, right? If people that, they maybe could make more money in a different job suddenly, and a job is there, right? And
Yes.
probably it's that they didn't even realize that there was a little thing on the bulletin board looking for someone to apply,
Mm-hmm.
because they were so in their
Mm-hmm.
own state of there isn't any opportunities for me, that they never saw
Yes.
the piece of paper.
Yes.
Is that the way it is, right? Like, is it that when we're not open to those pieces and we're not unraveling that we actually don't see things that physically are there in our real environment? Or is that person not there, right? Is that person
Yeah,
not there who doesn't smile, unless we're also looking for smiles and then that person is there?
totally. I
You know
think
what I'm
that's,
saying?
I totally hear what you're saying.
Okay.
I get you, girl. I'm like, I know where you're going with this. So I actually want to read you something in a minute from a book that I love. But so part of what you're saying is that I think it's both and. I think what you're saying is both and. What I mean by this is this. Opportunities, for you to be present to an opportunity, you have to be aware of the opportunity. You have to be consciously aware of it. But here's the thing that's really important. Opportunities often show up not looking like what you thought it was going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
We are very attached to things looking a certain way. And Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich, I don't even need to read from the book, but his quote is, opportunities often show up with the sly disguise of defeat. So think of how many opportunities show up in your life for you to grow, but they look like an obstacle or a problem. That's exactly what I was saying about the money barrier. There's an opportunity for you to do something, but it requires you to trade your time or your money, and then you see that as a problem and you don't take the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, it's the confirmation bias. If I believe people are unsafe, I am not going to notice the smiles. It would be dissonance theory. I see, this is so important. You do not see with your eyes. You see through cells of recognition in your eyes that are linked to your subconscious beliefs. Is that not like what? Yeah, exactly. This is why you and I could be in the same room, Jordan, with 20 other people watching a car accident, and we're going to have 20 different recounts of it. It's called observer bias, recency bias. Like, it's all the bias. It's literally, you're constantly confirming, and you're not doing this consciously. You're not going, I'm going to consciously confirm my bias. No, it's a subconscious pattern to go, if I think the world is unsafe, I literally think that guy over there that's smiling at me wants to mug me. And I hold my purse. But the key that's really important, and this is like $1 million thing, honestly, if you just take nothing else but this, if you truly get that in order for you to grow, the universe is going to give you an opportunity. And the opportunity shows up like a person, place, or a thing. Okay? And it's always going to look like it's coming with some level of problem. You experienced even signing up for the next program was a perfect example of that.
Totally.
Can I share that with people?
Yep.
Okay, because it's literally the example. So you wanted to take my next course called the Accelerator after the masterclass, and it showed up as it was on a day that you were already busy. Mm-hmm. And I said, and in my mind, it was opportunity always shows up with the sly disguise of defeat. But I had you think about that. And I said, okay. And then you texted me saying, I cleared my schedule, I'm doing it. But that is what the universe is almost testing you to say, how badly do you really want it? It's not just going to give it to you on a silver platter. If that was the case, everybody would be successful. Everybody would be abundant. So it's, for most people, what they deem as an opportunity is actually what they're attached to, the outcome looking like, versus being free to say, one of the mantras I always say to myself is, universe, give me what's in my highest and best good. Now, that might look like working with you. That might look like da-da-da, but it's definitely not going to look like what I thought it was if I was attached to a certain outcome. What's in my highest and best good? What's in your highest and best good? And so now for me, the reframe is every time I have a problem that shows up in my life, guess what I do? I actually say, where's the opportunity? There must be an opportunity here. So that's why I said it's both and. It's one that we don't actually know what opportunities often look like. Sometimes you think it has to be easy. And I always say, it's kind of like going to the gym. It's really the same equation of like, you go to the gym, the first few times you squat, you're like sore for 2 weeks, but then your body gets, into habituation, and it takes more for you to get those results. But you also have a greater level of tolerance it's the same thing with like, you have to go habitually to make that a habit and to change your body. And the same thing with mindset work is like, you have to stay in it habitually, and each level is going to call of more of you.
It's so interesting because that example that we gave of me there, it's funny 'cause I haven't shared this part of the story with you yet. But this is kind of funny. So the previous course was on Wednesdays, which is a day that I don't see patients. And so it easily fit into my calendar. But it also took up time that like often is dedicated to other self-care, right? And I recall like on the second or third week of the course, I thought to myself, I wish this was on a day that I was like at work, because then it wouldn't take up time like on a Wednesday where I've dedicated some time to other self-care and I could fit it in my work calendar. But that thought was like A, really fleeting, and B, but it also like came up against what some of my barriers is that I have to like work all the time. Right.
And that
And
totally.
so then when the opportunity presented itself to do the course on Thursday, right away, I was like, oh, I can't do that. That's a work day. Where like 2 weeks earlier, I had like secretly wished that it was on a work day so that I could do something else on that time on Wednesday. And then when the opportunity actually showed up, I didn't think I had what it took to like make it happen. Right. Even though that's secretly what I wanted.
You see what you're saying here? You're illustrating my point perfectly. No. This is the crazy shit we do.
Yeah.
People need to be like whoever's listening to this needs to go, holy shit, I do that all the time.
Yeah.
I am sending the universe double binding mixed messages. If this is what you have to get about that. And that's why when you message me saying I cleared it, I did it, you know why I was so happy? I wanted you to be in my course. Obviously, I would love for you to be in it. But it was more that I was like, you let your higher self win over your ego. If you would have let your conditioning win, you would have come up with all the reasons why you couldn't. But in that moment, you actually transcended your ego, which only wants to keep you safe. So this is really important, ladies and gentlemen, or whoever's watching, dogs, cats, whatever, babies. Your ego has two primary functions: to keep you safe and alive. That's it. It doesn't want you to change. So here you've got an opportunity to do work that's going to really have you transform. So you show up with, I don't have time, that's just what the ego does. But most people, they believe their objections to be more true than what they really want for themselves. That's the quintessence. They believe that to be true, like I can't make it happen. And when you did make it happen, you already started to rewrite your story. That's why those moments when I coach people, it's like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's actually not about me. The course is going to go on. It's about you standing for something. And it's funny because I picked up on that when I think I sent you that text. I said, you don't have to work so hard to be successful. And I say that because I feel like there's a lot of similarities between you and I picked up, like I had that same thing, that life was a struggle. I had to work really hard because I saw my parents doing that. So I used to burn myself out prior to, like I've shared the story with many of my groups, is like 2 years ago, I was almost so burnt every time I'd come home from work, because I had a brick and mortar clinic or practice. I would be in the fetal position because I was like catatonically exhausted. I think I definitely was in burnout, like my thyroid. I remember going to see Dr. Megan Walker, and she was like, you're this close to burning out your thyroid. She put me on like, what are they called again? Adaptogens. Okay. I was there. Why? Why do we do that? Well, because we have the paradigm is I've got to work really hard to be successful. So that would always equate to burnout. When I healed that wound, that injury, so to speak, that childhood injury, and I got that actually I can be more successful doing less. That was the reframe. And you know what? That's true. So I actually saw that in you. Like I picked up on that. And that's why I thought it was such a breakthrough that you just did that, for no other reason that you actually just said, you know what? I'm going to stand for myself here. So I thought that was brilliant. And I think it's such a great example of, if you're dealing with it, think about your patients.
For sure. Yeah. And we can see it, right? Where if patients are so tired, they're not performing well at work, but then they're struggling with money, but they're afraid to go for the promotion because they're underperforming, but then they don't want to spend money on the care. And then it becomes this like self-fulfilling prophecy, like kind of exactly what you said. Yeah. Or they want to transform their health for $300, right? Which tough. Like it's hard to have that conversation about you actually can make more money if you feel better, right?
Well,
Like
it's,
having
yes.
patients lean into that is really hard to understand. Whereas I think like this is not the first time I've tried to approach this whole concept. This is just the leveling up version of it.
Yeah.
Having to
Mhm.
make those decisions all the time around people say, well, how do you go to the gym so many hours a week? I'm like, because you don't want to see me if I don't.
Exactly.
Right?
I am not, it's not a good look. Trust me.
Not, no. Yeah. And you don't want to be the 20th person I've seen in a day. You don't like,
No.
that's not actually what you want. That's not, you don't know how to say that that's not what you want out of your healthcare practitioner, but that isn't what you want. You don't want to be my
Yeah.
20th person in a day.
Yeah.
And so, but then we're like, on the flip side, we're trying to ask women to lean into that and make those decisions for themselves when they've spent their whole life appealing to authority or trying to
Mhm.
be good in their job or never saying, you know what, I turn my email off at 6 p.m.
Totally. It's just boundaries. What you're talking
Yeah.
about is boundaries. But part of what was coming up as you were sharing that is, and I so relate because I don't, unfortunately with COVID, I haven't been able to go to the gym, but I walk every day and I do Pilates and I do all sorts of other things. Like physical activity for me is number one core value. Like it is the way, there is nothing that's going to get in the way of that first thing in the morning for me. Like I used to make a joke, like honestly, the president could call me and want something and it's like, I'm not available.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing. When we do not have high self-esteem and self-worth, it is hard for us to put down boundaries. And then we get enmeshed with people where we are like, if I don't respond to that person, they're going to be mad at me or they're going to think I'm not good enough. Like this is the way that we weave all that in. So what happens though, Jordan, which is so amazing, is as a leader like you, when you start to put those boundaries down for yourself and you start to care for yourself at that level, other people mirror that back at you. The healing starts, I think, when you're a leader, even more so, and you have a community of people that follow you, it's quintessential that you learn how to heal those things about yourself and put those boundaries down. Because there's always going to be someone, and I used to be terrible at boundaries. I think I've gotten progressively better. I think there's still more work to do. But one of the things about me, after I went through that period of burnout, I made a decision in that moment. I'm done with my practice. So here's like this little quick story. I had a practice downtown Toronto on Bay Street. I was seeing like 12 to 15 people a day in like a therapeutic sense, which is exhausting. Okay. I would come home and be in the fetal position. I couldn't even talk to my son. And I had this like another spiritual awakening. And I was like, I think I was after doing the adaptogens or whatever else, and I had some clarity. And I said, I can't fucking do this anymore. Pardon my French. And so and I had a mentor at the time who said to me, and these words will never leave me ever. She said, you need to carve out more space in your day for yourself, which to me was like crazy town. It was like asking me to like go to the moon. I was like, what? Go for a walk during the day? No, I got to see people to make money. Anyway, I heeded her advice because there was no other option. So breakdown moment, whereas all transformation happens. And I think the next month, I put a letter of like, I'm out of here, basically a notification that I would be leaving. I brought my list of clients. Seriously, I was like done. Like when I make a decision,
what they call it, it's called an I'm out of here letter.
yeah, it's like, peace, I'm out. Literally, I was like, the Roadrunner, like the little tracks. I was so out of there. And I also called every one of my clients at the time and I said, I will no longer be doing more than 4 sessions a day. And I'm raising my rates, basically all in 1 week. Fast forward to, this happened to be, by the way, just before COVID hit. So I was already fully virtual. 3 months later, COVID hit. What's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that in that breaking moment, I literally saw for myself that this belief of working hard for money was literally killing me. And in tuning into my higher self, in a guide at that coach at the time who said to me, you have to create space. You have to bring more love and joy into your life. Like, what do you love doing? And I said, I love getting lost in nature with a podcast. I could get lost for hours. She's like, well, then go do that. So I took 2 weeks off and I started to just nurture myself. And then I went fully virtual. COVID hit. All my courses went online. And this will be the biggest year I've ever had. And this is my point of what I teach. Making more money is easier, but it requires a radical shift in your thinking. And it actually requires you taking a chance on yourself. You have to actually do the action to see the result, for your subconscious mind to loop it back and say, oh, that worked. It's not, see, if you're just going to be in the intellectual realm of this work, it's never going to work. You actually have to go out in your life today and implement something here that you learned that caught your attention. Like, go take a risk. Go do something that you wouldn't normally do. Go spend money on something you wouldn't. Go for that extra long walk. Go, take the day off so that you can go do self-care. And then what happens is something shifts, like something radically shifted for me. I was like, oh my God, it's okay for me to go. When I go for a walk in the morning, I'm a better practitioner. I'm a better mother. I now get to work from home where I see my son's face all day. I work 4 hours maximum, like on screen. And then I spend the rest of the day reading and studying and doing what I love. And I say this because, trust me, from like a former addict of working and perfectionist and like someone who burnt herself out, I'm now doing it completely differently. And it's given me this sense of freedom, which is the only reason we started this work in the first. Like, why did you go into the work that you do? You want to help people and you want to feel free. And yet we don't. So, I mean, that's kind of a long-winded story of saying, like, part of what I teach, well, everything I teach, I have practiced, but I've also have seen other people, like thousands of people practice it, and it's shifted. You see quantum leaps in people's results, whether it's with their health or their mindset or their money or their relationships. Like, they really shift out of the limiting belief of work hard for money. Life is a struggle, and they create something new. They're like, it's easier to make more money. What if you just held on to that belief for a week?
It'd be scary for most people.
Yeah, exactly. Which leads to, it's scary for most people, and they need to be grounded in, like, as you know, with the course, like the practice of it. So part of why I created it as a curriculum is that, this is kind of an introduction to it, but then there's an actual practical application to it. Because here's the thing. Our subconscious mind, our ego mind, is super powerful. It's the most powerful voice in your head. So when you get into the practice of doing it and you get into the structure, it actually takes time. It takes repetition over time to reprogram it. It's not like, oh, I heard this cool conversation once, it's done. No, it's like every day, right? The meditation, this. It's like a prescription. It's no different than take your vitamin C at this time and take your thyroid at this time. Like, it's a prescription. Yeah, super cool, right?
It's so great. Can you just tell us a little bit about your course?
Yeah.
Now that we've opened all of this, it's like Pandora's box, right?
Yeah.
Where nothing is what you thought. And now we're just going to wrap up.
No, people should not be left with nothing is what they thought. What I want people to leave with is well, that's true. But in a good way, though. Nothing is what you thought, in a good way. That you,
because it creates possibility.
It does.
Right? It's like, that's all that is like that discomfort is just that there's possibility.
And, oh my God, totally. I want people to be left with, I have the power to choose and to change the way my life goes. That's not my mom and my dad anymore. And with that agency, you get to rewrite your story. Like, you're the author of the story, and I think that's the position that it needs to feel empowering for people. You don't want to get stuck in there's something wrong with me. I mean, at the end of the day, there's something wrong with all of us, quite literally. We all have imprints. Okay. So not one human being doesn't have them, but not from something wrong with me. But like, this should actually have people feel it's kind of no different than sometimes when someone gets a diagnosis. It takes the mystery out of something. Then they know what to do about it, right? Mm-hmm. And I have that with one of the girls in one of my courses, and she got a diagnosis for something, and rather than living in this fear and uncertainty, she had power over it. She's like, oh, now I know what to do. So in the same way, if your life isn't working for you in the way that you want to, amazing. Acknowledge that and understand that you have the power to change it. Because we either have the power to choose to change or to stay in our victim consciousness. And it's not a judgment. It's just, we have that power. Some of us will never change because we don't want to. And some of us are wanting to, right? So it gives people the agency and the personal responsibility to say, if I don't like the way things look in my life, I have the power. So that being said, my next course starts December 2nd, and it's the same course that Jordan did, which is called the Masterclass Series. I guess you'll probably link this up in the show notes.
I will.
Too. Yeah. It's a 4-week program, and it's like my baseline program where you learn extensively about the conscious subconscious mind, your imprints, the law of cause and effect, like pretty much everything we talked about here today in a deeper dive. And it's a 4-week program online over Zoom. And you get to, part of the beauty of the work is the community that you get to be part of, and people really having these transformations together as a group. So my next course is December 2nd, and it runs for 4 weeks. Jordan will link that up in her show notes. The early bird special is on now through November 20th. The cost of admission is super affordable. It's $297. And I really think when you think about that, to change your life, like it's, I did it really at that price during COVID too, because I was like, I just want there to be no barrier to entry for people to actually get this foundational program. So that's the program.
It's awesome. It's basically free.
Yeah. Free 99. It actually is. I think so too.
For what
I do.
Get.
Yeah. I think so too.
Yeah. And one of the things that I found most valuable about it was just to like reflect / dissect where those things came from. Because they weren't, like I said, they weren't intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
To be like, oh, this is what was taught or thought or modeled, right? And I spent lots of time looking at attachment theory and all of those, sort of psychological theories on where our mindset and all of that comes from in the first place. But this was still new to me, right? This was still like a new practice, even though it's something I've gone through like many times. That ability to like break down, and the questions that you asked were very helpful to like be able to see yourself a little bit separate from it, right? Which I think is actually where, like you said, if we can look at it more like a scientist, and I'm like holding my hand out and pointing at it, like people can see what I'm doing.
I can see you.
Like you can be separate from those thoughts and to say like, whoa, like where does that come from? Right. Mm-hmm. And now my girl gang, who we've all done your course now, Adele, we all say to each other, is that a self-limiting belief? Right. Like in our group text, because
that's hilarious.
Sometimes you need that reminder, right?
Totally.
Things that you're saying, that you're too busy, you don't have time, you don't know how to cook, like all of those things that we repeat to ourselves that reinforce that we're stuck where we're at. Sometimes we just need that reminder, right? That
totally.
Like not actually maybe the truth.
Can I ask you a question? What was, when you say like some of these things were like totally new to you, what was the one thing that was super new to you that was totally a blind spot?
There were a few. Like I think I definitely like resonated with the like hard work, like must work hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like life's a struggle, have to work hard, start at the bottom and grind to the top, right? Like
burn out to the top.
That one was there. So that one was more of a reminder for me. But just some of the scarcity mindset around not just money, because I don't actually have I don't have a lot of fear about money. I feel like that one is well healed for me. But it was around like time scarcity and not being generous with time. And it reminded me that I feel like I have a hard time like accepting help, maybe asking for help, because I have this belief or mindset that it's not there. Yeah. And like there's scarcity around that. Like, so resources. That I found really interesting. Yeah. That like resources are scarce and we hold them for ourselves, and we're not particularly generous with our time or love or whatnot. So I found that one really interesting.
You're going to get so much when we talk in the next program about the law of receiving. I bring in a lot of different universal laws, and you'll really start to see that scarcity. I mean, that's a built-in mechanism for most human beings. This is like an evolutionary thing. It's like hoard your resources. But when you actually start to learn about universal law, it's like you actually have to give in order to receive. That's a universal truth. So when we go into hoarding, we're in scarcity. And that's just like the conditioning. So it's really powerful for you to be able to identify and say, wow, like I noticed I say I don't have time or I don't have resources. And then that creates your environment, right? Where you struggle with time and then you don't feel like you're supported. It's like that whole confirmation bias piece. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so grateful that we had this time together. I feel like it's going to be an invaluable, like,
thank you,
brain exploding moment for our women who are listening. And we will link all of the information about the course in the show notes as well. So you can just go sign up. That's all I can say. Just go do it.
Thanks,
feeling Jordan. That like uncomfortable pit in your stomach feeling.
You should go do it.
Episode, you should just go do it. Yeah. So thank you so much, Adele. And how else can we get in contact with you? I'm going to put the link to your Instagram, which I also
Yeah.
find really great.
Thank you. Yeah. Instagram is, I don't like email's great, but Instagram's the best because then you get to like see my stories. And so it's Adele_wellness, at Adele_wellness. Instagram's the best way. And then you can DM me and we can chat and all that kind of fun stuff.
Awesome.
Thank you so
much for your time.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. It's my absolute passion to bring women quality and science-informed information about their health so that they can make empowered, good decisions about their health care. I'd like to invite you to join me in my Facebook community, Women's Health Unplugged. There we share live videos, blog posts, and behind-the-scenes information about the podcast where you can connect with me and other women who are interested in their health care. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/WH Unplugged. We'll see you there.